Talking about cults has become practically an American pastime, whether it's making fun of those kooky Xenu followers or the way the phrase drink the Kool-Aid has made its way into our vernacular. Cults have always fascinated us. But what about the more subtle, nuanced, false ideologies that make up what we'll be calling a soft cult today? What would it be like to grow up with your theology just skewed enough to make you walk away from faith altogether? We'll be talking to a very good friend of Theology on Tap about his story of growing up this way, where it led him, and what he believes now on today's episode of Theology on Air. Well, welcome back to Theology on Air. I'm Sarah Stone. I'm the Outreach Director for Young Adults at MDPC, and I'm joined, as usual, by the co-producer, Evan McClanahan, Senior Pastor at First Lutheran in Midtown. Wave for the fans. Mm-hmm. And we are joined today by our guest and very good friend, Clay Casassa, who's going to, in a minute, tell you a little bit about himself. I'm going to skip the little bio part because today's episode is really about Clay telling his story as one of our just stories of transformation, stories of people that have come to know God in a very different way through trial, and you'll hear a little bit more about that. But first, just a couple housekeeping items. If you have not already, definitely check out our website. It's www.houstontot.com. I don't know why I said www.
I know.
It was really unnecessary. Also, if you want to know how to Google things, okay, let me stop. But HoustonTOT.com. And then as you're listening to the podcast, please, please, please subscribe. Then you'll see when new stuff comes in. And you can even rate us, review us, give us 1 million stars. I don't know how many. It's like 5.
1 million is possible.
Yeah. But if you're going to be a hater, then just don't review us at all.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. But okay, I think that's all of that. This is one of, like I said, a few stories that we want to tell you this year of just transformation and changing one's ideas about faith. And so, Clay, I'm just going to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, tell us a little bit about growing up in what I've already tipped our hand a little bit that it was what you call a soft cult. But tell us a little bit about you and growing up and why you're here today.
Okay. So I'm Clay Casassa, for those of y'all at home. I did grow up in Houston. I've been here except for 5 years that I was in the Navy. And from second grade, so it would have been starting third grade on through high school graduation. I say that because it was a homeschool graduation. I was homeschooled in a program called ATI/IBLP, which stood for the Advanced Training Institute, which I'm just going to ask you, do you know at all what that would entail if I just said Advanced Training Institute?
No,
like
it sounds like a
It sounds like where you
for-
might go for to be an automobile mechanic.
Vocational, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Or
You're a Phoenix.
one of the other terms for it was the Institute in Basic Life Principles. Again,
That sounds like
nothing.
self-help.
Pretty vague.
Learn how to be assertive.
It sounds like a Scientologist. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, a little bit.
Because they talk about it like technology, Scientology. They talk about their technology, which is always an odd word, but that's what they describe it as.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, when I think of institute,
This was definitely not technologically focused. But I grew up under that. It was a homeschooling program that was really created in the 60s and on through the 80s to kind of combat the cultural revolution of the 60s. So basically from the conservative movement, a pushback against that to more traditional values. So this was a program that my parents felt like so this would have been in the late 80s, early 90s when we were starting this. So things like high school shootings were happening, kind of the public school system was going off the rails. So my parents decided we want to pull our children out of that, which I'm grateful for that type of protection from just obviously violence. But the idea was we're going to separate ourselves from the evil of the world. We're going to create this little bubble for ourselves where we'll be able to control the environment, teach everything we want to teach, create a pure, God-honoring environment.
And it was a homeschool organization, but it was linked to the ministry of
Bill Gothard.
Bill Gothard, who, for those of you that maybe know the story of like the Duggars, that's the crowd we're talking about. Bill Gothard, I believe, y'all can fact check me later, but has been sued multiple times.
Yeah,
so,
he has something like 24 sexual impropriety suits being filed against him.
Yeah,
it's been going on for years. What's that?
2000.
What? 2,000?
Did you say 2,000?
No, I said
2
2 dozen.
Oh,
Yeah.
2 dozen.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh,
It's
that
like-
escalated quickly.
It's like, yeah, that's a lot of people. But 2 dozen is
No.
also a lot.
Yes,
Yes.
it is.
And-
It's too many. It's
It's 2
about 2 dozen too many.
2 dozen too many. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I am going to refer for the rest of the episode to this as a cult. You said you didn't realize maybe till you were an adult that what you grew up in was a cult, but now that you kind of have sussed that out, you and some of your siblings, let's talk a little bit about what made it so. Like, homeschooling's not terrible. That doesn't make something a cult. And so tell us maybe, like, I know one of the big things when I heard you tell me this that made my ears perk up is that they define grace differently. So for those of you listening, I think we would probably define grace as something like, undeserved love and blessing from God kind of thing, right? Like,
Unmerited favor.
Yeah. But tell us how they define grace.
So, and this is pretty much verbatim. It's the desire and power to do God's will. So put that in the context, and if y'all can remember the reference, but it's the passage of scripture that says, "For by grace are you saved through faith, and not of ourselves." So I just always like to substitute in there the cult's definition of grace, which is, "For by the power and desire to do God's will are you saved."
Yikes.
And I just sit there and pause on that for a minute.
Yeah.
Well, I would invite the audience to do that and just see if that passes the smell test. Because to me, it doesn't.
It does not.
Well, if you're
Yeah.
a reformed person, no. But honestly, it's a pretty normal definition of all religious life.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what Roman Catholicism essentially offered, and
I'm not saying that's not a part of it. Is having the desire and the power to do God's will, but the first instance of grace being what brings us to God. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally the opposite. It's
Right.
saying you can do this, which I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions that the world has of most religion, including Christianity. It's like, oh, just be a good enough person and then God will be happy with you.
Yeah.
And
in
it's
sort of,
not that.
Yeah, in sort of Lutheran kind of Orthodox circles, you'll often hear that there's sort of like 2 religions in the world. There's true grace, and then there's everything else. So you're either saved by grace or it's up to you. So that's kind of boils it down. So they have placed themselves, we would say, outside of the doctrines of grace, as Lutherans, Calvinists, etc. would understand it. So
Yeah.
with that definition.
Okay.
So the grace definition is wonky, but then, and I'm jumping around a little bit here because I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things they believed, and then we're going to talk to some of the kooky stuff that you experienced growing up. But talk about some more sort of like doctrinal or moral differences. What is it? ATI, LMNOP? What's it called again?
ATI, so they were kind of sister organizations. Technically they were separate, but really they were pretty inbred. So ATI/IBLP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or we can just call them the Gothardites, which is what I called them in college.
Called the cult.
They're
I
the
don't care.
quiver full people. If you've ever heard of the,
Yeah.
yeah, like I dated a guy in college who was a Gothardite, and he informed me that no one should use birth control ever because you want your quiver nice and full. I was like so young. I was like, I'm not even thinking about my quiver yet.
It's one of the Psalms about
Yes.
it's a blessing to have a quiver full of children or something.
But I
like
think
that. Yeah.
as we go on in this conversation, I think that's going to be a common theme, though, is we're saying, because I agree that is in Scripture, and I think children are great, and having a lot of children might be great for some people. But just the common theme is going to be the twisting and the perverting and the cherry picking of Scripture.
And I'm gathering a lot of legalism too.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. So tell us about some of those doctrinal or moral differences. And I mean, I have a couple things written down.
Okay.
I've heard this story a few times. I find it fascinating that you can think of that would maybe like stray from Orthodox Christian teaching.
Do you want to talk about the umbrella?
I definitely want to talk about the umbrella. I almost wish we had an umbrella so we could do the demo.
That would be highly triggering for me.
Sorry.
No, the umbrella of protection was basically the concept of if you could. It was a chart. It was a diagram. So there was this literal umbrella at the top, and underneath it was the man, the husband, the man of the family, like in the center, off to the side with the wives and the children. And so as long as they were under the umbrella, so the umbrella of authority would have been God's authority, but also there was an expectation that there was sort of a hierarchy there, that the man was then the smaller umbrella, and then the wife the smaller end of that, and the children, of course, at the very bottom. And the idea was that as long as you're under authority, which is the source of protection, the rain can't get you. No harm can get to you. I think we have a mutual friend that I think described that they actually got up on stage with their family and actually had an umbrella, and like I think the pastor threw paper clips at them or something.
Right,
and
just so the paper clips bouncing off, and they
weren't, and the family was under the umbrella, so therefore they couldn't be touched by the paper clips. So that was the idea. Authority was the key. If you were under authority, you were protected from everything and anything. And if something bad happened, but if something bad did happen while you were still under authority, it was God's will, because you were under his will for you to be under authority. So it was like part of the plan.
So how did you know if something bad happened, if it was God's will or if it was that the authority had slipped? I mean, just
okay. So since the channel was seen as God threw the authority down to the subservience, whatever, to people under authority. So if it came through that channel, it couldn't be out of God's will. It couldn't be out of God's plan, because his plan is for us to be under authority.
Right. But it was supposed to protect you from things like, and this is the best part of the graphic. We might have to find the graphic and insert it somehow into this video. Don't know if we can do that or not, but you can look it up. We're going to put some information below the video for those of you watching on YouTube, and you can look this up for yourself. But in the clip, the thing that I find so hilarious and also dark and disturbing is the sort of arrows of bad things that are raining down on the umbrella are different for men and women. Do you want to say what they are?
Yeah, the only thing I remember from that graphic in particular was that cervical cancer. I think was one of them. If the females, whether it be the wife or the girls, are out of authority, then they're more
susceptible,
open, to things like cervical cancer.
Yeah, I think it said for men, pornography. That's like a temptation that if they weren't under the umbrella, that would get them. And then women, cervical cancer. It's very specific. I mean, cervical cancer is often caused by
having a quiver full, I guess.
So. Oh my gosh.
Well, I mean, really. I mean, if that's the greatest ideal,
you can have a full quiver with cervical.
Oh,
well,
okay.
with HPV that gives you cervical cancer. But now we're on a whole STD talk. So
okay.
Talk to your doctor today. Okay. Okay. So you had the umbrella of protection. Wasn't there also so? For those of you that don't know, Clay is part of a group that meets that. So I've heard this story before with a whole PowerPoint slide presentation, and one of the other, and if everyone's like a PowerPoint, and then they watched it and their jaws dropped and their eyes were wide, and it was very fascinating. But one of the other slides, several of the slides in there, had to do with what you mentioned earlier about Bill Gothard having all these court cases open against him because there was sexual abuse, and it seems like a lot of the rhetoric in the writings of this organization really put a lot of blame on victims. So can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think I'm remembering the graphic. By the way, all those graphics that you're talking about, those came from the curriculum, like straight up screenshots from, they were called wisdom booklets. And again, like I'm just going to throw terms out here, and it could go down the rabbit hole forever. So kind of, I'll throw out as many of those as you want. But so they were called wisdom booklets, which are these little, just white pamphlets put together, and they had like 6 categories of. It was basically, this was the academic part of the education, was because we still had to meet state requirements for education. My mom kept transcripts of all the subjects, but say like the science, so like the science portion would have been met by this section in the wisdom book that talked about cervical, about. Technically it was scientific because it's dealing with medicine.
Yeah, and the body, anatomy, yeah.
But it was always through the lens of Scripture, which we should always be seeing through the lens of Scripture. But it was very much like they were shoehorning, they were using that as a vehicle, saying
like a
science
Trojan horse.
To be like, to get to the point they really wanted to talk about, which was what standards can we make you adhere to protect you from this, or to, basically that was the teachable moment was.
But if they're if they're protecting people, especially let's say, girls, and then the girls aren't sort of following those rules or staying within the umbrella of protection, if sexual abuse happened, it seemed like a lot of the literature was suggesting that it was her fault
For sure.
Because she had sort of invited it. She hadn't been careful to do these things that she had learned.
Yeah.
And that's just a pretty countercultural thing right now, especially.
Yeah. I'll just throw out 2 or 3 examples that I can think about now. One of them was, I remember this graphic of, guys, it's hard to explain the graphics. Basically saying, okay, so you were abused, maybe just regular abuse, or if it was sexual abuse. It was basically how could God use this for His glory, or like, but in much of, I mean, obviously God can bring glory out of brokenness, but it was in a very particular way that I'm trying to describe. It's very difficult to describe.
We can paste it in.
What's
later.
that?
We can paste it in later in the video.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Oh, the graphic?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'll just see if I can describe it really quick. If not, I'll jump off that point. But it was almost like this was. It was almost like, I don't know. I'm going to butcher this right now. It'll make a lot more sense seeing the graphic. It's it's like very blaringly obvious, like what the problem.
But basically, it's almost like they know that this is going to happen, and so they're setting the stage of a way that like good can come out of it or something like.
Yikes.
Yeah, but it's just seeing the graphic would probably tie it.
Gotcha.
Well,
tie it in.
And speaking of graphics, one of the other ones that I now have sort of a running joke with a few of our mutual friends about is part of the preparation to help girls avoid these kinds of things was this thing called eye traps. I know this is just a side piece of it, but I just think it's kind of humorous. So tell us about eye traps.
Okay.
And tell us if Evan and I are engaging in any eye traps today.
Well,
I did get this shirt from Express like a dozen years ago.
You were showing pride by insisting on wearing name brands.
Yeah. Well, actually, I actually do try to shy away from any logos. So,
Okay.
I mean, you wouldn't know this was an Express shirt if I didn't tell you. It could be JCPenney for all you know. Okay.
Again, there you go.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead. But eye traps.
So I think unless you're wearing a burlap sack, you probably have eye
Yeah.
traps on. The graphic that Sarah is talking about is there was like 9 different like drawings of models with just like blank faces of like wearing different pieces of clothing, and they were very frumpily dressed. Would you agree?
They're modest.
Yes. Like no one probably watching this would have a problem thinking there was any type of scandalous, but like eye traps would be basically an eye trap is anything that traps your eyes away from somebody else's countenance, from the face, from the eyes. So like a logo, across or just any logo that it draws the eyes away from to that particular focal point, like a V-neck.
Clay is wearing a V-neck. For those of you just listening, I'm really.
But the rules are
disappointed.
different for me.
No. True.
But like, what I guess in female skirts is there often a slit to like make a little more room, make it a little more roomy, something like that.
Yeah, just so it's not as boxy. Sometimes they'll do little cutouts at the bottom or whatever.
So that would have been an eye trap because it's angular. I guess things like earrings, things like that would be considered eye traps. Even your scarf would be, I'm looking at your scarf because it's colorful, not at your face.
Eyes up here, Clay. So the interesting.
Can women wear makeup?
Oh, good.
If you're one of the girls that Gothard's grooming for himself, yes, you can.
Okay. So double standards all the way.
Well, here's the thing: is like that one. I'm a little fuzzier on that one because that just wasn't on my mind wearing makeup. That would have been more of a female thing.
Can I?
But go ahead. Oh, well, I actually had a cousin. They were my father and his brother. So my father and his uncle married 2 sisters, my mother and her sisters. So we had this other. My cousins, who I'm going to refer to, both of our families grew up using this same program. And my aunt and my female cousin, they actually wore like head bonnets, like you would see like Mennonites.
Like a little house on the prairie.
Or like you would see, those white.
Oh, Amish. Yeah.
I mean, kind of reminiscent of Handmaid's Tale type of like.
Yeah.
Things, but it was like you would see like an Amish person, wearing. It was basically that. So they wore that, long skirts.
So people looking in on that would think crazy fundamentalists. They're probably just super legalistic. But the problem wasn't just legalism, right? I mean, having known Clay as an adult, every now and then I'll be sort of shocked by something that he doesn't know from like just pop culture, and I'll be like, well, that was evil. So maybe we can go backwards and use some of the like cultural touchstones that you might be able to list to help us get an understanding of the cult And I know you
For
gave some
example,
examples.
Chuck Norris, good or bad?
Oh
Surely
my
good.
gosh.
No, Chuck Norris definitely good.
Okay.
I didn't even know who Chuck Norris was when I was younger, but I don't think he would have been called evil. I don't know.
So real fast. By the way, are these? So it's a homeschool movement. Is it also a home church movement, or did you have more kind of mainstream church bodies that or was it like because like house house churches are sometimes said to be the biblical model, and then crazy stuff can happen there too because there isn't actual good authority, and accountability and stuff.
Right.
But
Are you saying, was there like
did you go to like kind of a congregation where like say 80 people were there on a Sunday, or did people gather a dozen people at a time in houses and things like that?
No, it was a regular church. So it was a church building in Katy,
Did everyone in
Texas.
that church do that homeschool model?
No, I think back then it was just my family and my cousin's family. There may have been like one other random in there. There was about half and half homeschool and half public school, but the homeschoolers weren't involved in this program we were in. It was just my family and my cousin's family.
Gotcha. Okay, sorry, pop culture references.
That's okay.
But they don't have to be pop culture, but just sort of cultural, watershed kind of,
Are you talking about, just ways that, are you talking about like the Duggars, the Village, that type of thing?
Yeah,
okay. The Duggars, they actually use the same program that we use, the ATI IBLP. In fact, there was a yearly conference in Knoxville, Tennessee that kind of families, all these ATI IBLP families would make a trek into. We'd get in our 16-passenger vans and go to Knoxville, Tennessee. And my family did that, not every year, but definitely a handful of years. And kind of the known thing was you would put a sign up in your window of your vehicle that said ATI or like headed to Knoxville, something like that. So, and we would see people on the road with those same signs. You would honk at them, things like that. So in the very first episode, I believe, of the very first season of the Duggars show on TLC, there's it's just like a second or two, but there's like a little pan shot, a little glimpse of their van, and they have that sign in their vehicle. So they were definitely a part of this. They're like the poster child for like, this is our model family.
Well, they were the poster child until,
nobody really knew. I mean, it's still not a very known thing, the cult.
No, I know. I mean, until everything came out about the eldest son.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Like sexually abusing one of his younger sisters.
Yeah.
And then people were like, what's going on? And I think that brought some attention to it.
Are they still on TV? I'm so dumb.
I don't know, actually.
Okay, whatever.
Not sure.
It'd be like season 28 by now, so whatever.
But that's one thing I throw out to help people understand, because it's just a very bizarre world to get people to understand. So if people have seen, or at least vaguely familiar with the Duggars, they know that there's people with all those 18 kids, and they just live very strange, very conservative and very religious. That would be a little glimpse into my experience, kind of watching that. Also, so M. Night Shyamalan's movie The Village, which I'm a big fan of, and my sisters and cousins are too as well, because I remember when it first came out, we took a group from our church to watch it. This would have been when my oldest sister and I were now out on our own. But we took a group to watch it, and that movie gets a lot of hate. A lot of people don't like it, but we really honed in on it. In fact, when we were back at our house talking about it, my cousin, my sister, and I leaned over to each other and said, "Did you notice this? Did you feel anything?" And they said yes.
Wow.
So that's if you've seen the movie, then it's
an isolated community trying to
using fear of the outside and all the bad influences and all the bad things will happen to you if you venture outside the village, as a threat to keep you. And that's like a lot of the things you were mentioning seem like they're rooted in that, like the, what was it called? I was going to say eye candy, but that's not it.
Eye traps.
That's how Evan thinks of it. He's like trap, schmap, it's candy.
The umbrella, it's like get outside the umbrella in big trouble, or, don't follow these rules and you get in trouble. So,
right.
Well, and you mentioned that people looking on the outside in to say the Duggars would think that they had all this, this crazy religious upbringing or lifestyle. Tell us a little bit about some of the just lifestyle stuff that you now know, looking back, growing up as a kid, other families did not do this.
Okay.
I'll pull up the little list.
Okay.
I mean, I remember you telling me something about breakfast in a prayer room or something.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Well, this little segment right here, this is specifically about the training centers that they had. So if you want to talk about that, we can.
I was just thinking about you as a kid. I mean, I'm remembering you telling me things like being in the Kroger parking lot and stopping and, having to say what you think people's sins would be or something like that?
Right. I can talk. Yeah, that was actually a prescribed exercise in the curriculum. And I don't remember.
Go wherever you want.
Yeah. Like I don't remember the exact reason we were doing it, but it was basically the assignment was go. Oh yeah, because so much was put on the countenance about if you're a joyful Christian, if you truly have like Christ inside you, your eyes will be bright and you will be smiling. People will be able to see it on your countenance. So I think the point of the exercise was to go and find people and literally just look at their exterior and determine what kind of person is this.
I'm in trouble.
I mean, yes, you are.
I'm such a
sir.
grump. I'm like scowling all all the time.
You need to do
We'll
some
work
soul
on that.
searching.
Especially when we have to wear these masks and everything. Anyway, go ahead. But there's kind of, I just have to say, and let me just interject real fast.
Yeah.
There's kind of some truth in all these things, right? Like it's a
Yes.
pretty
That's what makes it so
conservative-
tricky.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Like I mean, should like women dress modestly? Yes. The Bible indicates this, and like should people sort of in general be able to know if you're a Christian or not? I mean, they shall know you're a Christian by your love and things like that. So there's like some truth in all these things,
Right.
Yeah, but the face that you use coming out of Kroger.
That's
a bit-
because I'm never happy coming out of Kroger because my Kroger in my neighborhood's it's not the nicest Kroger,
Right.
Only a
Well-
non-Christian would say that.
Exactly.
I think also it was just very much a zero-sum game. It was either if you are not one thing, you are the other, like very, very unequivocally.
Yeah, right.
So
You're either
the
in or out.
right. So we went. We went to the Kroger parking lot and just sat there in the car, and my sisters and my mother, and watched people go in and out. And I don't remember what exactly we wrote down, but it was like we were supposed to be able to tell if someone was a good guy or a bad guy, basically by their look. I remember I was in Walmart, I think, with my uncle one time, the same uncle whose family was had them in the cult. I think we were at the Walmart auto service department getting an oil change, and I remember my uncle pulling me aside and pointing to one of the mechanics who had like a short kind of haircut like on the side, and I don't remember exactly, but he made it a point to point out to me, you see that guy? He's like, he's very rebellious with his haircut. And thinking back now, I was like, I mean, he may have had just a perfectly normal haircut, but rebellion was the problem with him having a rebellious haircut was because rebellion was one of the chief sins, because that's anti-authority, and authority was the main focal point of the cult.
See, that's sort of the thing, though. Like, authority is a good thing, So, but then it becomes, like an idol or something. It becomes,
God's authority is a good thing.
Right.
Authoritarian discipline becomes troublesome.
Well, this is why it's hard to get across kind of how strange it all was, because even you're saying, well, that doesn't sound
I'm not
too
arguing
bad.
with you. I'm just saying that it's always like the truth gone mad,
Right.
Yeah. Perversion of the truth.
Oh, was there was
Sorry,
there was something
Walmart.
I'm sorry. No, that's
authority.
No, it wasn't about
It was
that.
a mechanic, Evan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't about that. I can't remember what it was.
Well, and you weren't allowed to watch a lot of movies that, I mean, even like Disney movies.
Yeah, No Sesame
worked.
Street.
No Sesame Street? Why? Because Oscar the Grouch did not have a good countenance? Or?
I think it was, and I'm basically a conservative / libertarian these days, so I actually might agree with this, that a lot of social agendas are getting put in children's shows.
Yeah.
But that was the reason. It was like they were teaching things, they were starting to talk about
sharing.
things,
That's where it starts.
that my parents didn't want us hearing about. But I wasn't. For instance, I remember when The Lion King first came out. I was a kid. That was the movie. Everyone was raving about this movie. Everyone was going to see it, including my friends. And I think
That's the thing with the clouds forming the word sex.
That's a maybe urban legend.
Oh, okay.
But
yes.
you can see it if
But
you
yes.
want to see it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's a movie about lions, but about family.
But that wasn't the problem. I didn't
Right.
find out that was the thing until later on in
okay.
life. It was that there's the concept of reincarnation
Okay.
in there. And so I remember my neighbor friends, they were going to see the movie, and they offered me a ticket. They offered my parents, hey, we'll take Clay to go see it if he wants, because it was the big movie. Everyone was going to see it. And I remember I couldn't go because it had that in it. So I've
there's
not,
a scene where Mufasa is kind of in the sky saying like, "Be brave,"
or the
whatever.
circle of life, that. But that's an example of the things that you said a little earlier, that I'm just not like, that's not a part of my cultural vocabulary. I guess I'm.
Have you seen The Lion King yet?
I have not.
I made progress. I saw Aladdin a while back.
That is not The Lion King.
It's not The Lion King.
Okay, so
I've not
we'll be
seen
watching The Lion
either
King.
one of those. So.
What is the matter with you? It's such a beautiful story, and Phil Collins does the music. Okay, I'm getting off the topic here, but you also were punished for quoting movies, right? When you were little.
No, not when I was little. This would have been at one of the training centers.
Okay, so maybe we need to move ahead to that. Sure. By the way, the really funny thing here is that this guy speaks in movie quotes more than anyone I know. So you're definitely in rebellion. I'm here to tell you.
I'm not under the umbrella.
You, oh dear.
Just watch more Chuck Norris movies.
Okay, so you have talked a couple of times about these training centers. Why don't you? So the cult owned them here and abroad. Tell us about those, and then you went to one. Is that correct?
I was at 2, actually. I spent time at 2.
And for this kind of rebellion to still be in you, my goodness.
Well, it's funny because thinking about my cousin, so there was a training center in Oklahoma City, and he would actually get sent there whenever it was basically like in substitution of military school. His parents felt like he was being bad, so they would send him there to get corrected, and he felt very like shunned for that.
So what age kids go to these? Like it's for teenagers and on, kind of, or what?
It would be probably teenagers. Or there were families that lived there too. Like if the parents were employed there, or if they were just doing service work there, they would bring their families. Probably not just an individual child. Probably be like a teenager through young adult. Yeah.
Okay.
But these were the institute, we'll call it, because that was kind of the term, just the institute. Owned these facilities throughout the country: Oklahoma City, Big Sandy, Texas, Indianapolis, Oak Brook, Illinois, maybe some others that I'm just not remembering right now. But they were basically properties that were either given to the institute or donated, or the institute bought. Like Hobby Lobby actually basically gave the institute the one in Big Sandy, Texas, which I spent time at.
It's like prison.
It's like re-education camp. Discipline. Well, I mean, was it so like when we see shows on Scientology and like people are sent off and they like do slave labor for 18 hours a day or something?
You're
mopping floors.
Elements of that. I remember working in the dish pit. Here's the thing: is I remember one of the programs that I was sent to at the Indianapolis Training Center was called Life Focus. I remember like it's a lot of scripture memorization. It's a lot of like, hey, let's gather around and watch, bring out the old TV set, on the stand with the VCR under it, and let's watch this video about why rock music is evil, or this missionary telling them about this story of how he learned to yield his rights, which is a phrase that was a buzz phrase in the cult, is yield your rights, about how he planted these pineapple trees on his mission field, and the natives, like in their culture, they were like, he hired them to do it, he paid them money, but in their culture, it's like, I planted it, so I get to eat it. So through that experience, he was saying, I learned to like give my rights up to the to the pineapple trees. Yes. So we just videos like that. Ray Comfort was one of the speakers. I know he's still doing stuff with your former boyfriend, Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron. Where did we go wrong?
But try to bring me back. But these training centers, so I went to the program called Life Focus.
How old were you when you went the first time?
That was before high school. So maybe not before high school graduation. So it was maybe like junior high, or maybe actually like early high school years.
But you were a teenager.
Yeah, definitely a minor. Not on my own yet. So.
And you had to like memorize a certain amount of scripture before you could eat or something. Maybe I'm conflating these ideas in my mind. But wasn't there something about going to a prayer room for a certain? You could had to have your spiritual breakfast before you had your physical breakfast or something? That
was definitely a doctrine, but these were two separate incidents. The prayer room was where you would go to pray and like think about what you had done, wrong.
So it's the corner.
Yeah, except for this was at the Indianapolis Training Center. This was basically an old hotel. So
that's not creepy at all.
Like you would go into like a budget hotel. That's what it was. It was just donated to the institute, and they ran their program there. So going to the prayer room would have been just one of these rooms where it was just all you have is a table and a pad of paper and the Bible and a pencil, and just whatever, there's a bed in there just like any hotel room, but there's like no decorations, no nothing, just, and the temperature could be whatever it is. It's just, you are supposed to sit there and like think about what you did and write like your apology statement.
Was it a Gideon's Bible?
I don't
Could have
know.
been left over.
It was King James, whatever it was.
That's what
That
he's
was
getting
the only
at.
authorized version. Okay.
No, I was making a joke about the hotel, how the Gideons.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But they were King James onlyist as well, I guess.
For a while they were, yeah.
Oh, the Institute, yes.
Okay.
King James.
Okay.
But yeah, it was some of these didn't actually happen to me. Some of these I read and heard about from other people. There's actually a website called recoveringgrace.org where former students will share their stories on there, and their stories of, at one point, the doors were locked from the outside. So like they would put you in this hotel room, and the rations, like you may just get bread and water, or they may not bring you food for a meal, or they may bring you like an apple or something. Because the point there is not to be having a grand old time, right? The point is to be thinking about what you did. So I know at some point they were locking the doors. Like basically you were a prisoner. Anyone put in there, and I was put in there once for an infraction. I can't remember what it was, which is really funny because I was a really good kid. Like I was very compliant.
Hadn't even seen The Lion King.
And but I did something, maybe quoted a movie or something. I got put in there to think about what I had done. But yeah, just think, but like basically it was locking. You were locked in your room. Like you could not get out. I think there was at least one incident of people like trying to escape by throwing chairs through like the glass windows and like climbing down. I know one of the guys that I was there with, he escaped the building somehow. He didn't want to be there because I remember it was a big hubbub. But the funny thing about that is all the doors, this is an old hotel, right? All the doors were locked from the inside. So like you had to go by the front desk and ask them to buzz you out. So I don't know how he got out, but a very, very controlled environment.
How long were you at the first time that you went to one of these work camps? I mean, institutes.
Well, no, you joke, but that's actually, I was thinking about it as I was writing you some of my responses, was I remember a lot of scripture memorization, a lot of prayer time, like a lot of time reading the word, a lot of time watching these videos, of the curriculum. But other than that, I remember it was a lot of like, it's free labor as we worked in the dish pit. Dish pit with, any commercial.
Dishwasher.
Yeah, it's got any place that has a kitchen.
Yeah.
Kind of, and this was an old hotel, so it had all the industrial dishwashing equipment. That was a big task because servanthood was such a big priority to the Institute. It was like, you have to be serving. You have to always be serving people. So yeah, I feel like a lot of it was like unpaid labor. It was like, you need to learn how to be a servant. Like, so, I don't complain about going to work in the dish pit. This is kind of why even now, like when I'm with you at a restaurant and you'll order something special off the menu.
I don't know what he's talking about. I would never.
But in my mind, I'm always like, wow, how are you doing that? Because in my mind, it's like, you don't ask for anything extra. It's like, who am I to ask for something special?
That's interesting. I didn't know that little tidbit. So talk a little bit about how they viewed like romance and dating and boy-girl relationships and that kind of thing, because that's a little bit different too, right?
Oh, geez. This is a big one.
Are you triggered?
Yeah, actually kind of, but that's okay. I'll push through.
We'll carry on. We got this.
So yes, don't you know that dating is just preparation for divorce?
Oh my. I thought it was going to be sex was the bad thing. But
well,
went
it
straight
is.
to divorce.
Well, it is, but yes, dating was prescribed as not the way to do things. In fact, in one of the episodes of the Duggar shows, I remember Josh Duggar was talking about, I think they had just watched the Fireproof movie, with Kirk Cameron.
I'm aware.
So
Dare.
Everyone knows the quality film that is, but Josh Duggar was talking very arrogantly. So if you go back and watch the video about how he's like, people are dating, he's like, no, you don't do it that way. You do it the way we did it. And actually in the first season, they actually show you Josh Duggar's like courtship of the woman he eventually married, and it's just awkward as hell.
Okay, so just to clarify, in Fireproof, do people date?
I remember that may have not been good to bring up Fireproof because it's not about. That's not what the
No,
movie's
it's about a married couple.
Okay, because I was like, because it's like a conservative Christian movie.
Yeah.
So I'm like,
Right.
are these people so conservative they don't even like that? But that's a side
No,
point.
they were endorsing it.
Okay.
But basically, it dovetailed into him basically saying, everyone knows dating is going to fail. It's
Gotcha.
foolishness.
But in a courtship model, there's really no dating there. You don't kiss like until the wedding day. In some cases, like the Joshua Harris book, Never Been Kissed, would definitely be
It's
heroic.
I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Josh
Never Been
Harris,
Kissed is
yeah.
a Drew Barrymore movie.
That's true.
Oh man,
We're making a little movie list for later. Lion King, Never Been Kissed.
No,
great.
I Kissed Dating Goodbye was a very popular book when I was growing up. And while he wasn't, at least not to my knowledge, he wasn't involved in the cult, like that was the exact mindset was, this is bad, this is evil, this is something we shouldn't be involved in. We're gonna find the better way to do things.
Yeah.
So the model of courtship is very much, it's the sequence of steps would be, so a young man sees a woman he likes, a young woman he likes.
He loves her countenance.
Exactly. And he will then, first he's got to clear it with his father and say, hey, he has to clear with his father to ask her father just to make known that he's interested.
His intentions.
And so then at that point, there was no prescribed set amount of time, I don't think, but it could be like even a process of months to years where the young man would basically date the woman's father, basically like he's getting to know you, you're getting to know him, like y'all haven't, he's like sussing you out.
You want to go hunting, together, or fishing together, or something like that.
But at that point, it's just the father, it's just the potential father-in-law and the son. And so at that point, if the young man passes the smell test with the father, then he can make his intentions known to the young lady. And then there's no unchaperoned dates. You're always in like a group setting. You don't touch. Always chaperone. And yes, the eventual goal being like that you will have not like physically touched until the moment where the pastor says.
So does the daughter date the guy's, father?
No, because she holds no authority. No.
Right.
No,
Yeah.
She doesn't get to make the decisions.
Yeah.
Wow. But she does get to say yes or no to the proposal, ostensibly, right? Like, or is that just a foregone conclusion that if she's being pursued by someone, it's going to be?
That's a little murky because while there were prescribed ways of being that the cult said this is the way that is like our poster, our the model that we want you to follow. Like families had individual choices. Like the best families wouldn't have a TV in the house. My family had a TV in the house. The best families, the females didn't wear pants. Well, while my sisters did wear a fair amount of
They did wear
dresses.
long skirts.
Right,
just
right.
Yeah, definitely.
they just went around with nothing on the bottom. It was a real eye trap, if you ask me.
Jumpers, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But no, so each family had discretion on how strict they were, but so that would obviously play into the whole courtship model. But yeah, that was generally females didn't have there just wasn't that same level of like needing consent or like their opinions considered, that type of thing.
Which gets back to some of the literature on should something bad happen, you probably made that happen.
I remember there was
invited it.
There was one piece of literature from the Institute where it was basically the son had been sexually molesting his sister, and it was like the sisters were basically like, even these were very young children, was like, would they, or it was like when the son was changing their diapers or something like that, it was like, well, we have to make sure they're covered up, then that type of thing. Yeah, a lot of victim blaming.
Yeah. And of course, like we said earlier, the head of the whole thing, Bill Gothard, had all manner of inappropriate relationships with young girls.
There are lots of accounts from the women on the Recovering Grace website that talk about how he groomed them, how he liked them to have their hair a certain way, like curly hair was a thing, was Gothard's preference. It was it's a grooming process. Yeah. And a lot of these were actually like underage, like not 18 yet. I don't think he's ever been accused of, well, Yeah.
You can Google that yourself if
Yeah.
you're interested in finding out more about that. But okay, so I saw in some of the notes that you sent, and I'm not seeing it here, but something about this kind of authoritarian setup. It kind of set things up, at least for you, and I'm sure for others, where there was tension between you and your parents, especially your dad. And so correct me if I'm wrong, but you then after high school went into the military, and you've said to me, you think you went into there, maybe at the time you didn't realize it, but now you realize that it appealed to this authoritarian kind of thing. So tell us about that decision, and then we'll walk forward to when you became the godless heathen you were when I found you. I'm kidding. I didn't find you on the side of the road or anything crazy like that. But
So there was no tension between my parents and I in the sense of that I would have questioned their authority when I was living with them. That just wasn't an option.
Yeah.
And I was a good compliant kid, so I tried to do the best I could to adhere to that. And so so this was a homeschool cult, right? After high school graduation, there's no real reason to be in the cult. So I just started, I went and worked, just started trying to get on with life. Oh yeah. So most students when they graduate high school are going to college, right? These days anyway. And college was very much a no-no. Like that was not something that was to be desired to go to college.
Why?
Because that was, and again, as a current conservative libertarian, I agree with this. The university system is absolutely corrupt, and with social justice and with a lot of
liberal leanings,
right?
Yeah.
But that was the idea, was that they're just so wisdom was always treasured above knowledge in the cult, which again I think is a biblical concept. But it was the idea that colleges, they're just going to puff you up with knowledge, they're just going to teach you, but they're going to, which this is true, they do teach people to question God, but it was the idea we just can't have you exposed to that. Just, you can't go to this liberal place of learning and get corrupted. So I just worked, went to the world of work, and just did that for a few years and decided I wanted to join the Navy because that was post 9/11. So that was kind of what my friends were doing. That's what I was doing. I grew up in a patriotic family who wanted to serve. So I did that, and it wasn't a case of I just wanted to rebel against everything I've been taught. It was once I was out from under that expectation, like no one was watching over me anymore, I just slowly began to fall away from that. And hanging around in the military, like these were the first people I'd really hung around with in my life who were just like hard drinkers, hard living people, just like totally not, or even like the ones who weren't like big carousers. It was just, they were different than me. And so I was
they had seen The Lion King, probably.
Absolutely. That's what got him started down the bad path. And I was still trying to be like I still believe in God, and I was still trying to be a good Christian, and all that. It's just, I had no foundation of my own. Like everything was just, I had been going through the motions my whole life. I had been doing these prescribed things, because that was the only option. That was the only thing. That was the only lifestyle I knew. So once I had the options to not do that, then I started slowly falling away. Just a very slow process of that until eventually it just went to apathy and then to anger at God that I've been sold a false bill of goods in this, because the whole way the lifestyle of the cult was sold was to the parents was, if you follow all these steps, if you do these things that we've extrapolated from Scripture as like these formulas for success, for being blessed, then your children will have good lives. And what kind of parent doesn't want that for their children? So I feel like my parents, like I feel bad for them in that sense, that they were sold a false bill of goods as much as me and my sisters were. So then I became angry when I started to realize, wow, I'm this old in life, and I'm seeing all my friends, move off, get married, and have what we would call successful lives. And over the course of time, as I'm seeing that not happen in my life, I'm just getting more and more angry, disillusioned, until I never became an atheist. I never stopped believing in God, but I just said, you're doing your party over there in heaven, like, just leave me alone. I don't want any part of that. I want to go to my party. Don't care. And so I did that for a couple years until my life, due to a layoff and not having a college degree and things like that, just everything in my life kind of imploded in on itself, which brought me to my knees, basically. I was throwing out foxhole prayers. I had, rejected God for a few years here and just saying, like, you're the only thing I know to call out to was God, was saying, I know I've been bad here, but I'm asking, I need some help here.
Did you have any other examples of who this God was, or teaching on who this God was, other than what you had grown up with at this point? Like, had you heard, say, the Methodist perspective, or, something like that?
No, I grew up in a non-denominational church, which is really in the South is code for Southern Baptist, which and I think my sisters would agree with this. They're just it was like a small church, so it's very, everyone knows everyone else's business, very like, oh, so-and-so's children are doing that. Like, let's kind of shy away from them. I'm sorry, say the...
So, no, so like you're in a dark place and you're praying to God. It's like, but who is the God that you're praying to? Was it only the God that you grew up with? Or did you, at that point, there is only one God, but like, was there another expression of who this God was that you could appeal to at this point?
No, not at this point. It would have been, the way I viewed God before was in John Lee Hancock's The Alamo, the movie. He made a movie like 10 years ago, something like that. There's the vision of General Santa Anna, is that he's telling his generals, I want you to just throw all the troops at the Alamo. And his generals are saying, but they'll all get slaughtered. And Santa Anna says, what are the lives of soldiers but so many chickens? That's how I viewed God, was as that general, or as like Loki from the Avengers, where he comes down and makes everyone kneel before him and says, this is what you want. You crave subjugation. Like, and here I am, your God. So that was basically my view of him. It was a God that if I didn't keep all the rules, he was angry at me. And I knew I hadn't been keeping the rules.
Well, that's a pretty natural derivation from what you've been taught, right?
Right.
If you're raised with legalism, then you're going to appeal to legalism, and then you're also going to fail at legalism.
Right.
Okay, so where we find ourselves in the story now, you're this godless heathen. That's the term that he used that I always think is funny. And it's, you use that term on purpose because you didn't stop believing he existed,
right,
but you just wanted nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
But now you're here on Theology on Air. So what happened between this low point, godless heathen, and now?
Okay. So this would have been, I think 2017 was when I got laid off. And that's basically, I was looking for any handhold, anything that could pull me out of just the disaster that my life had become. And one of my younger sisters, and so we all had this kind of disillusionment with the cult, and so we all went out to live our own lives and kind of deal with it as best we could. She always tried to hold on to her faith, like try to salvage faith and a relationship with God from what we've been taught, but at this point I had just completely rejected it.
This is a sister I know, right?
Yes.
Who I remember posted something. This is before I knew you. She posted something on Facebook after watching The Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt on Netflix, and said something like, "Yikes, this hits close to home."
Yeah.
And I just remember thinking, that's such a comedy. Like, it's so preposterous, but that would hit somebody close to home.
Yeah.
That was the beginning of me learning more about her story. Yeah, but
sure.
Continue.
And so my sister, I was in the car with her one day, and she knew I was really struggling and really angry. And she said, I know you don't go to church. I know you're really bitter about that. But my friend, Sarah Stone, is going to be part of a thing at their church called Alpha, which was a evangelistic tool where you could probably explain it better than I can, but I'll... Yeah.
It's kind of like Christianity 101, but it's intended for people that are asking questions, they're not on Team Jesus or new to the faith, that kind of thing. But yeah. So
my sister said, this might be a place where you could come and air your grievances, kind of, or at least feel comfortable talking about this kind of thing again in a place that's not going to judge you, which that's what I would have experienced at the church before.
Yeah.
Or some kind of well-intentioned kind of, oh, you're just confused, let's get you like back on the right path type of thing, which would just tried to force me, like, you need to memorize more scripture, you need to pray, all this type of stuff. So at that point, because I was seeking God again, I was angry. I was very much like, I don't want to go back to church. Those people are a bunch of fakes, and just, I don't like them. But I said, if I'm ever going to bury the hatchet and make peace with God, then this is probably the best chance I have to do it in an environment like that. So I started coming to Alpha, and I know you've told stories about reflecting on how I was, like, even just my body posture indicated I didn't want to be there.
No, it's
Straws,
funny now,
pouting.
but
Yeah.
no, it wasn't. It was like he'd scoot his chair a little bit out of the circle and kind of sit like half out, like he was ready to exit at any point, kind of thing. And I know a few times you brought up Jordan Peterson. He's your boy. Yeah, but I mean, sounds like something was stirring at least.
Yes. I mean, it was a war in my mind the whole time I was sitting there in each session. But the thing I remember was not the videos that were played, which are very kind of like Sunday schoolish type stories, you know, very, very, very Jesus-y, I guess you would say.
I mean, it is to introduce people to Jesus.
Right.
So, yeah.
But basically, I knew that all before. Like, I had read the
Yeah.
Bible cover to cover multiple times. I memorized a lot of scripture. So I knew all the technical stuff about
Yeah.
what they were talking about. But what really kept me there and really just sustained me there was the people there, including you and some of the other staff at MDPC, who just took time to just let me be what I was in that moment, just angry and pissed off, confused, wanting to kind of make reconciliation, but not feeling like it was safe to.
Yeah.
And y'all just didn't require me to be anything other than what I was at that moment, and just would stay late and let me talk about this kind of thing that we're talking about. And it took a while, like after Alpha was done, I kept coming to church, and I felt like I wanted to be there, like it was a place that I could try to be there again. But you know, it took about a year. That whole process, like I wasn't ready to say yes again. I was like, I'm comfortable hanging out with these people. I think these are good people, but I'm just not ready yet.
Well, and you would come to church like after the music, sit in the back, and then a couple
Did I
weeks
do
later,
that?
yeah, and then you would sit over by our mutual friend Dan, and then but now I sit close to the front. Now he'll sit close to the front. Like we've made some serious progress. Not that sitting close to the front means you're any closer to the Lord, but
Do you remember having any theological insights or even like an epiphany where you realized like a different gospel message was presented or like a different, like, oh, this is just really different theology and you know?
Yes.
Okay.
It wasn't that the message, that the words were different, because they were. It was the way y'all handled me, or like that y'all. I could just feel a difference in that you weren't just reciting a rule book to me. It was like y'all were just patient, and like you were telling me the salvation story, which I know, but it was just it was the grace, which was not the
definition we started
desire
with.
and power.
Yeah.
It was I just felt it was very much an emotional thing. It's because I had a lot of the knowledge already of Scripture. The emotional part, the part that kind of was the salve on my emotional hurting, was the thing that really made the difference.
that's so interesting. We started by wrong definition of grace, and then what pulled you back to faith, or maybe to a real saving faith for the first time, is real grace.
Yes.
Which is what it is for everybody.
Yes.
That really knows Jesus. That's, man, such a cool thing.
Well, it wasn't a 10-step formula as it
Yeah.
had been before in my life. You know, hit these wickets and then you get to score all your coins at the end.
Yeah.
It was a very personal experience, you know.
You've said, when you told the story to a group that we're both in, you said there's a distinction between Islam and Israel. Will you tell us that? I like this.
Yes, this was during that period of being laid off, and that period of a couple years. And at that point, because I was reaching back out to God, but I also wasn't sure. I was like, I don't know if I can trust you again. I was listening to every voice who I thought would tell me the truth. I just started listening to all types of podcasts, from Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson, Ravi Zacharias, Chris Hitchens. Well, nobody knows Clavin, but I'm just saying the big names, like the big atheists, even the big Christians. Dinesh D'Souza, people who were both religious and very anti-religious, because I was like, I will listen to all of you. Just tell me something true. Tell me something that I can see. That's true. I can hold on to that. I can believe that. And so I think in those videos, somebody talked about the difference between Islam and Christianity. It was that the actual word Islam means to submit to God. That's the actual translation. But Israel, you know, was it Jacob? Was it Jacob?
Yeah,
His name?
Jacob's name was changed to Israel.
But the actual name Israel means to wrestle with God, which he did, which Jacob did. He wrestled with the angel, or I guess was it God or the angel? I can't remember. But yes, both. Okay. But he didn't, like if Jacob had been following the prescription of the cult, it would have been, he's my authority. I can't wrestle with him. I have to accept everything he's saying. But yet we see in Scripture that God rewarded his wrestling. Like God understands that and honored it in that case. So that to me, as a big like libertarian, conservative, independent thinker, independent responsibility type of person, that really appealed to me. The idea that I can wrestle with God and ask these tough questions and be pissed off to a degree, and still make progress and still be not pushed away. I can still be in the group. I can still be searching.
Yeah, loved by
and God
him.
doesn't reject me for that.
Yeah. Oh man, so good. It's such a good story. I mean, I love cults. I have a weird fascination with cults, but I just also love when people finally see God for who he is. It's awesome. Do you have any more questions?
No, I just, I'm sitting here thinking, in principle, like a lot of the teachings, like I resonate with as kind of an inherent conservative, right? It's like, and I'm also thinking, I mean, even just this last week, it seems like a lot of people feel like our country changed a lot, not to really offer a lot of commentary on it, but I think there are a lot of people who feel, I mean, I've had people tell me, I think we live in a lawless nation now. They think the election was stolen. They think that, and I'm not saying I disagree. I'm just saying these are the things they articulate. And I think that what we very well could see is a real movement of homeschooling, very conservative teachings. The Benedict option. Who was the guy that wrote that book? Rod Dreher. Anyway, but the idea of like retreating because our nation is really lost. It's going downhill fast. There needs to be systematic withdrawal from institutions, the academy, entertainment, all that. I mean, things that, they were worried about things in the 80s that now we're like, 80s?
Yeah.
Golden era. What are you talking about? Like Ronald Reagan, Back to the Future?
Back to the Future.
I mean,
the power
it was like,
of love.
but like, I'm like telling my kids, like, yeah, I grew up in a great time, like it was the 50s, right? But people who grew up in the 50s are like, the 80s, it could never be worse. So I'm just thinking of like, could we see this kind of thing like really popping up all over the place among people that you might not suspect it because they are terrified that like their country is gone?
Well, I would say yes. It wouldn't surprise me if we do see that. I think that the homeschooling trend was already starting to go that way.
I mean, we're homeschooling anyway, basically.
But it's the exchange of one master for another. It's feeling insecure in one thing and saying, well, we're going to follow all these rules and that will keep us secure. And yes, it is very, I often feel it when I'm explaining this to people. I'm like, man, I'm just not getting through how weird it was because they're like, well, we should be good. Like we should,
Yeah.
But just one incident one piece of the curriculum that popped into my head is there's a graphic, and I think it'll be on one of those links that you're going to post, is basically dealing about, again, with sexual abuse or not even sexual abuse, just abuse of like, the phrase was, if the husband abuses the wife, like there is no victim because the husband is her authority. And I saw your eyes go up on that. And that's the type of thing sometimes I'll find a little nugget like that I'll be able to bring up to people that are kind of like, oh yeah, that
was bad.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's the thing is the Duggars or the people think they watch the Duggars and they think it's all very quaint, oh, they're just old fashioned, it runs so much deeper than that.
Well, just even when you were mentioning like that, it wasn't encouraged to go to a university because they're going to, try to push you away from God or make you question God. And that might be true. And yet there is something good about having your beliefs questioned and having to do the critical thinking process of figuring out what you believe is true. Right?
Yeah.
Why are you smiling?
Because I'm thinking about the whole God is Not Dead movie series where that's like what they wanted us to be, was like the heroes who would stand up to the professor and like win the day, and like dunk on them basically.
Okay. Have the gotcha moment.
Right.
Good luck with that.
So you brought that up. I know there's people like Michael Knowles who grew up conservative, then became liberal, and now he's back to, I mean, not that I'm not trying to equate conservatism with
Christianity.
Right. Although maybe I kind of am. But
that's
a
for
different
another
discussion.
podcast.
Yes, basically, I'm not trying to taint this conversation.
Yeah.
We're kind of bringing that into that. But yeah, it was like, to me, I took that as my father saying, he actually told me, like I asked him a few years ago, like, did y'all like purposely not want me to go to college, or was it just not something that came up? And he said, yeah, I didn't want, because when he grew up, like during the 70s, 60s, you were either a hippie or a cowboy, and he wasn't a hippie.
Yeah.
So he was very conservative, very staunchly conservative. And I asked him a few years ago, I said, was it like you were very much against me going to college, or it just wasn't an option? He said, I didn't want you to go because I didn't want you to become a liberal, because in his mind, that's the worst thing I could become.
Wow. And you're like, newsflash, I actually became a godless heathen. Even worse.
But to me, and now I'm back in the circle because I went out and made it my own. You know, I went out and
that was my point, was saying when you talked about wrestling, it's almost like that kind of authoritarian legalism doesn't give room to wrestling, even with that kind of thing. Like if someone tries to prove you wrong, then you have the opportunity to think for yourself and realize that God is real. And
so that's part of the reason why my life imploded the way it did, was because I hadn't been allowed to take all those risks and fail at them. So now I've had to cram those risks and failures into a very compressed short period of time, which has been very unpleasant. But I would say to my father that I said, so you didn't want me to go like get corrupted here. That to me speaks that you didn't think you did good enough job, like training me in the right way. Like I was going to get corrupted like this.
Interesting. I'm sure he loved that conversation.
Well, I didn't tell him that, but that in my mind, that's what I'm thinking.
Well, I think probably we'll go ahead and wrap this up. But if you have more questions for Clay, you can contact us and we'll put you in connection with him, and you can stalk him on Facebook and all that. But you can always find us on our YouTube channel on Facebook, which is Facebook.com/Theology on Tap Houston, and of course our website HoustonTOT.com. And any other, I don't know exactly when this will air, so I don't want to say, and looking forward to blah 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 event. But anyway, well, until we see you guys again or talk to you again, then we just encourage you to question freely, think deeply, and disagree as needed.